to that. And back when I used to be Stephen Colbert, for the rapport on Fridays, I would always listen to John and David Plotz and Emily Bazelon on Fridays, so I would have some idea of what people who actually follow politics were actually thinking and talking about. And the podcast continues to be a very intimate, it's like a 4-person lunch, and you're the 4th person there having cocktails with them on a Friday in Washington, where they jaw over the day's news and what's coming up in the week. And when they wouldn't get that thing up in time before my morning meeting on Fridays, I would call up David Plotz and go, David, please, I have a show to do. Please tell me what I'm supposed to think about next week. And while I like all of them, John has a very unique position on that show, and pretty much in everything he does. He is absolutely equal. He is fair to a fault, in my opinion. And I call him my elvish friend, because I'm a huge fan of The Lord of the Rings, and there's an aphorism in The Lord of the Rings, which is, ask no advice of the elves, for they will say both yes and no. And that's what John is like. Especially if it's on the record. And we're live streaming right now, so I assume he's going to be at his most elvish this evening. After listening to him on the Slate Political Gabfest, I was in absolutely no way surprised when his career took off beautifully, starting in 2009, when he was made a contributor and an analyst for CBS News. Then in 2011, he became the political director of CBS News. And last summer, he took over for Bob Schieffer as the host of Face the Nation, and it is now the #1 Sunday news show in America. And upcoming, he has a book called Whistle Stop, My Favorite Stories from the Presidential Campaign History, which is also based on a fantastic podcast of the same name. But best of all, John is a great storyteller. And we are all in luck to hear him tell a few and try to pry some opinion out of him in front of a camera. Please welcome my friend and the nation face himself, John Dickerson. Nice to see you.
It's great to see you.
This is very
nice.
pleasant.
Yeah.
You're good for a story and for a drink. Hope we can go out drinking later after the stories.
Okay.
Though if we had the drinks first, the stories would be better, I think.
Yeah. Well, after the stories, we may need a drink.
Well, we'll get to the Trump campaign in a minute. When we spoke last in December, just talking about the election, that is, you were looking for a theory of this election. Have you found one yet? And why do you need one?
Yeah, so I haven't found it yet. The reason I need one is the first campaign I ever covered when I was at Time, one of the bureau chiefs said, you always have to be looking for what is the question of this election? What are we trying to figure out? What are we trying to answer? What are candidates trying to answer? What's the public trying to answer? Because campaigns used to be, and one of the challenges with this one is whether this is still the case, it's a national conversation. It's the way we take control of our country every 4 years. We adjudicate all these discussions, and then, presumably, and this is a big challenge now in this current election, presumably after that conversation has taken place, we have a sense of a result has taken place.
But first you have to have what that question is?
You have to know what question you're asking to see what you're trying to solve. So
can I suggest a question for this
Yeah.
election? What the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And I only mean that, I'm kind of kidding on the square, because that seems to be, both on the Trump side and the Bernie side, what is appealing to the audience.
Well, we know partially what's going on, which is that people in both sides, on the left and the right, feel like the elites, the people they've given power to, have not been listening to them. And we've seen this before. We've seen this sense of disappointment, this sense of rage. Here's what it feels like to me. Okay, so I was at a McDonald's recently on the road. I stopped, I'm in the men's room, and I'm standing there next to a guy, and we're both trying to use the faucet. It's one of those hand-activated faucets, but it doesn't get activated, right? So we're both standing there trying to get it to activate, and we look like we're doing like 12-inch scratching because we're doing this, to get it to move, and it won't go. And the guy is getting really frustrated, and he says, "Who do I see about this?" That's what the voters feel like. They feel like I almost lost you there, didn't I?
Yeah, no, not at all. No, you had me the entire
You
time.
thought chicken McNuggets were coming in. No. So a thing gets imposed on their lives. They like the old faucets. They like to turn a thing and have water come out. That's not, so somebody imposed something on their life, and the thing that they imposed doesn't work, and it doesn't work, and they can't go, there's nobody that can go see to get it fixed or make it better.
What if the other person in the bathroom with you at that moment identifies as a different gender at that moment? Does that make it better or worse in that moment? Because that's part of the thing. I mean, that might be part of the thing you're talking about, is that there are also there are cultural norms that people see shifting, and that feels like an imposition as well.
Right. I mean, well, but so there are two things. I mean, people who feel like their rights are being trampled on by this new arrangement that's being forced on them, they feel like, as you say, I mean, they're frustrated. Somebody in Washington is telling me what to do in North Carolina. But then there are the people who identify a certain way and want to live their life like everybody else, and they feel like they should have those rights and not have those rights trampled on by other people. And so that clash normally gets adjudicated in campaigns. But what if the structure of campaigns makes it impossible to adjudicate those clashes? What if the way we talk to each other makes it impossible to adjudicate those clashes? Because everybody goes immediately to their corners. The way we talk on social media removes all restraint. So our conversation and talk is as hot as possible. And anybody who doesn't like the hottest talk on both left and right basically opts out and says, this is all noise and shouting, and I'm just not going to participate.
Well, there's correct me if I'm wrong, you are the political director of CBS News, but there's always been a difference between how we govern and how we run for office. Right. And so the ability to adjudicate the clash, is that what you said? Mm-hmm. To adjudicate the clash should happen in the halls of government, which doesn't really happen much anymore. But haven't we always gone to our corners in campaigns? I mean, haven't there been other campaigns before this where there's this level of divisiveness?
Right, yes, but presumably then, and if the campaigns are fought on totally base and non-policy grounds, nevertheless, they have conferred upon the victor some legitimacy and some policy support that they then use to send their program through Congress. That's what's broken down, is that I have a set of ideas that have been ratified by the voters, and now I'm going to sell them in Congress, but they're not getting anywhere in Congress because of the sclerosis in the system in Washington. And that's the other part that's broken down, is if compromise was the genius of the American system, nobody gets a bonus for compromising anymore. It's just the opposite, actually.
But if you have enough people behind you, if they're passionate enough, can't you drive your ideas through once you get into office? For instance, Trump has signature programs: build a wall, no Muslims, right, and kick all the Mexicans out. All right. So he has the legitimacy of the nomination, and these are clear, unequivocal ideas that he has won by running on. Right. So how are we not adjudicating the clash through that process?
Because the people in his own party who are supporting him don't agree with any of the ideas that he's put forward. I mean,
but who are the people in the party then?
Like this.
Who are the people in the party then? Because the people in the party, the elites, or the people who actually voted for him?
Yeah.
Who gets to be the Republican Party?
Well,
or any party?
So at some point, the people in Congress have to participate and play a role. But he will come with the funny thing is, I mean, we have two extraordinary things going on just in terms of talking about the Republicans for a moment. On the one hand, you have the people who supported Donald Trump. We've had them on Face the Nation, and we say, where do you stand on his signature policy items? And they'll say, well, I don't agree with those things. I don't think we've ever had a nominee of a party supported by members of that party who are so fundamentally in disagreement with him on the core policies at the top of his campaign. Then we have another extraordinary thing going on right now, which is that the Speaker of the House, who was seen to be the synthesis between two camps in the Republican Party at one point, is
the Tea Party and
the
sort
Tea
of the
Party
establishment.
and the establishment, and Paul Ryan is on the exact opposite end of the spectrum on the issues of trade, immigration, taxes, tone, from Donald Trump. So they don't have just small disagreements. They're totally on the opposite ends of things. That's pretty rare, too.
So can you oraculate for us and say who wins that particular clash? because then a clash is maintained within the party, and you have someone who is in office, who is the Speaker of the House and one of the most powerful people in the world, and you have the person who is ostensibly, when you achieve the nomination, the leader of the party. So who wins this clash
So
of the
you
titans?
see a little bit, so for the purposes of winning the campaign, they'll just switch the turf. In other words, they'll just make the campaign about Hillary Clinton, just as Hillary Clinton will make the campaign about Donald Trump.
Sure.
So the inconsistencies, and parties do this all the time, that is, and we've seen in the polls a lot of Republicans coming in behind Donald Trump as if he's just a generic Republican, which is great for him. We talked a lot about the fissures in the party. The polling shows a lot of Republicans coming in behind Donald Trump. The fissures, while they're still there at the leadership level, in the grassroots are, they're coming in behind Donald Trump in a way that a lot of people probably wouldn't have expected. So how it gets, how these inconsistencies get worked out is that they focus on a common enemy, Hillary Clinton, and they focus on the big issues, the court, the Second Amendment, issues where he can say, look, at the very basic level, you just want a Republican who can name your Supreme Court picks. Like all the rest of this stuff, we can disagree, we can have inconsistencies, but if I'm going to name conservative justices, that's going to lock in policy for 40 years. You want that. You don't want Hillary Clinton naming those justices, and that'll get a lot of people to sort of paper over the other stuff.
Let's talk about the Democrats for a second. Is Hillary Clinton boring? Because she can't generate the level of excitement that Bernie Sanders can. Or is she just living in a campaign right now where she's between people who are willing to rouse a crowd with promises that they know themselves they cannot deliver on, and she is walking down the center of possibility lane?
Yeah, so this is similar to something that's happening on the Republican side. But yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders is speaking to that frustration we talked about when we started, which is that the system is it's rigged, and not only is it rigged to help people other than me, but they just don't. The people in power who care about their friends and care about their comforts, they're not hearing me, and I want to make a noise that they can hear. And also, and that sense of frustration is, I keep going back to, I now go back to the DMV. It's like, you're supposed to be working for me, you're supposed to care about the things I care about, and you're just over here doing this stuff over, because your rich friends have told you to do it. That sense of frustration, it's boiling, and so, who cares?
I like the idea that the people of the DMV have rich friends
Yeah.
in place controlling them. The puppet masters of the
Right.
DMV.
I know.
That's a really good image, yeah.
It's where
metaphor breaks down slightly.
Metaphor
there.
broke.
Exactly,
Exactly. But
Well, so on the Republican side, you've got people complaining that you media elite, because you're a media elite, John. Congratulations, you're a media elite. Do you accept the mantle of media elite? You're the host.
Yeah, I guess if that's what. Yeah.
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 Yes or no, Senator?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Counsel will be provided if it's requested. So as a member of the media elite, some people say that y'all aren't fact-checking Trump enough, that y'all aren't checking his demagoguery enough,
Right.
that you're not pointing out how ridiculous he is. And then on the Democratic side, that y'all aren't reality-checking Bernie enough. Do you feel between a rock and a hard place in this election that you can't please anybody? Or is that even your job?
That's a lot of questions.
I have a follow-up to it.
Yeah. So going back to Bernie as a way of trying to answer that question, which is that he speaks to a larger truth, and so the facts don't really matter.
Bernie does.
Well, in the sense that, and by facts I mean when you talked about possibility lane, it's a great example of, when he talks about universal health care, what he's conveying is such an overwhelming passion for a system that takes care of people who can't, who need the help and who need the health care, and that it's an outrage that you shouldn't be able to talk about anything else but that outrage, which is that people don't get coverage in America, or that people don't work for a wage that allows them to, buy their kid a present at Christmas, or get their kids some tutoring if they need help. These are the grinding problems of daily life that nobody gives a damn about in the political conversation. That anger, who cares if his numbers don't add up? I want somebody who speaks and understands and reflects my anger back to me, not rage, not although in some politics it is rage, but who just understands how elementally frustrating that is. So that makes a candidate very appealing. And so when somebody comes along and says, well, we're going to work it out in committee, and I'm going to rebuild ties and build bridges, that's not scratching the itch. And it also already feels to these voters like there's a built-in capitulation, that basically we're all going to settle in the end. And people are not in a mood to settle.
And that's exacerbated on the Democratic side because of the superdelegate idea, is that you feel like the fix is in already for Hillary Clinton, and so that his argument about everything is corrupt is borne out by the process he's going through himself. You're seeing him experience the unfairness that he's talking about.
Right, although it may be
Emotionally,
overstated.
if not factually.
Yeah,
I'm overstating it perhaps as much as he is.
Yeah, although his strategy now relies on the superdelegates, which is an interesting wrinkle in this. Because
he has no choice but to take up the ring of power for himself, John.
Right.
He has to win. Is there an election that you would compare this one to? I mean, I love Whistle Stop. And again, please, if you don't want to listen to the Gabfest, listen to the Gabfest. If you don't listen to Whistle Stop, treat yourself, because they're great. They're wonderful length. They're about 30 minutes long or something like that. And you go over individual moments that are turning points for famous stories within political campaigns, like the crying in New Hampshire for Ed Muskie or something like that. What would you compare? Is there something that you've learned in your fandom of presidential campaigns that this compares to?
There are pieces. So on the Bernie Sanders side, in 1980, Ted Kennedy is fighting Jimmy Carter. A party hasn't kicked out its nominee since Chester Arthur, so 1884, long time. So Kennedy fights Carter. Everybody thinks that Carter got really hurt by the hostages. At first, when the hostages were taken, his numbers went up. He didn't campaign because the country rallied around him. Kennedy was sort of in a fix because he couldn't attack the president, would be seen as unpatriotic. Anyway, then Carter's numbers went back down. We're having an energy crisis, inflation's high. He was going to be the first president whose approval ratings would be lower than inflation. That was the joke. It wasn't actually true. So Kennedy loses, but he has momentum at the end. It's the Sanders argument. He has momentum at the end, and he basically says, I know I don't have the right number of delegates, but I'm going to go to the convention and make the case that Carter was artificially elevated by this rally around the flag idea, and that he's not, A, a true believer in the liberal cause as I am, and B, he can't beat Reagan. So they have a big rules fight over this rule that basically makes everybody stay pledged. Kennedy ends up losing, but it's what Sanders is basically threatening, is to go all the way to the convention, even if he doesn't win in pledged delegates, and have a big open conversation about whether the party is really best represented by Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders.
Well, does Kennedy ever eventually really throw his support behind Carter?
No, there's a big, first of all, he loses in the pledged delegates. Carter's going to the convention, and Kennedy visits him in the White House and says, we've got to have a debate. And Carter says, why do we have to have...
But after he's totally lost.
He's lost. He says, why do we have to have a debate? And he says, there are still issues between us. And Carter thinks about it for a minute. And some of his aides say, okay, because if he debates him, then maybe Kennedy will go back in his box, say, I'm okay with the party, and really kind of support Carter. I know.
Maybe if I rub some lamb's blood on my throat, the tiger will go away.
Right, exactly. And Carter gets convinced in this. Then he talks to Mondale, his vice president. Mondale says, you're crazy. He'll use the debate as a forum for his ideas, prove to everybody that you don't have what it takes, and build enthusiasm for his campaign. So Carter doesn't debate with him. But anyway, they finally, Kennedy loses on this rule fight. He has to basically finally give in. He's supposed to go meet Carter on the stage. He and Bob Shrum, his political advisor, practice in the hotel, I think it was in the Waldorf, the raising of the hand, the famous arm raising in unison that parties are supposed to go through.
After Carter comes out to accept the nomination.
After Carter accepts the nomination. And he comes to the stage. Carter in his diary says he's been drinking. Says Kennedy's been drinking, not Carter's been drinking. They shake hands, and what I noticed last night as I was putting the book to bed, because that was last night was the last night pretty much I can have my hands on it, there's a picture of the two of them shaking hands, and in the picture, Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts has his huge meaty paw right under Kennedy's arm, basically saying, look, Senator, make this happen. So they never raise...
Really jamming it in the air?
Well, he's at least... they would love to get the arms raised. He's just trying to get a handshake. And so he's moving Kennedy in to shake hands with Carter, so they never do the arm raising that they practiced back in the hotel. And that became, there's a big debate, as there are in many of these stories, like the Muskie story, did he really cry or not? There's a big debate about whether that was really as big a deal at the time as we've all made it out to be. But everybody made it out to be a big deal that they didn't raise their arms. And the reason the arm raising mattered is that conventions used to have these kind of fights. And so the conflict we were talking about would only get resolved like hours before the photo op. So everybody would sort of say, yes, we've all, beaten the dickens out of each other, but now we're all friends. And they'd need to have that kind of big moment.
Okay, so that's the Democratic side. Is there, and I hesitate to ask, is there any model for what Donald Trump has done and the position he holds within a party that he now leads but is at odds with?
I don't think, there aren't models about him, and we should get back to your fact-checking question at some point, but so when you, one of the chapters in the book is about Wallace and his '68 campaign. When you listen to George Wallace talking about the protesters at his rallies, he used to have great fun with them in a way that Donald Trump doesn't. I mean, he would he would tell the hippies that he'd sign their sandals, or he'd say, "Oh, you look lovely, dear," and then he'd say, "Oh, you're a he," because they all had long hair. And so that was all, but then he got a little tired of it, and then he would talk about how they should be strung up and arrested and beat. And so when you hear that, what Wallace said about his protesters sounds very similar to what Donald Trump says about his protesters. Wallace obviously was making a more overt racial appeal. The protests in the cities over the war and crime were different than now. But when Donald Trump talks about immigration and talks about a Muslim ban, you see some parallels in the way the two of them talk about the forces they want to eject that are intruding on American life. Wallace was had much more of a kind of lawyer's. He was a former judge. Had much more of a lawyer's. He wrapped it all in Jefferson and states' rights, and so that's different. The only final other thing I would mention is Andrew Jackson in 1824. Basically, when Andrew Jackson was saying the system is rigged by the elites, he sounds just like Sanders and Trump. When Trump was trying to argue for how he was getting railroaded out of the nomination before he walked away with the nomination after winning Indiana, he sounded just basically, he was saying, who are you going to listen to, the people or these totally exhausted, empty elites who are making your decisions for you? And so even though, Andrew Jackson walked around with bullets rattling around in his body from the duels he had had, so he was quite a different character, but his argument was essentially the same one being made today.
So let's get back to the question that you didn't answer.
Okay.
Which is the media elites like yourself have been, which we've established, have been criticized for essentially letting Trump get away with it for too long. And the candidates are criticized for not saying he was a fool to his face in the debates. Basically legitimizing him by his presence.
Right, although having been in one of those debates, they got to it. They ultimately, at the end of at first they didn't.
Right.
But at the end
he was leading in the,
by
that point he was leading in the polls, and he was too powerful a character. But the press has also been criticized for giving him too much of a free ride.
Right.
People are criticized for letting him call into their shows. Right. You've allowed him to call into your show. Why do you do that, and do you think you would let anyone do that?
Right. So, and we'll have to talk about 1964 in a minute because I forgot about that one. But I think there are a couple of things. I think he's been fact-checked to a fairly well. I think that there are more fact-checks of the things, both for two reasons. One, because he provides more opportunities. And two, because everybody has fact-checked him. Now, what happened was, in the Republican Party, the fact-checking didn't change his trajectory. The policy inconsistencies didn't change his trajectory. And the policy inconsistencies are not just with his previous statements. So when he says, I always said Libya was a bad idea, and then there are statements where he said it was a good idea and that Obama should go in. That's one set of inconsistencies. But then there are policy inconsistencies, the size of the deficit that would be created by his tax cut and so forth, that don't carry the weight that didn't carry the weight in the primary that they would have in the past. Gerald Ford beats Ronald Reagan in New Hampshire in 1976 because of one speech Ronald Reagan gave in which he said he was going to take $90 billion out of the federal budget. And Ford said, well, if you take it out of the federal budget, the states are going to have to pay. And in New Hampshire, they said that means we're going to have to raise taxes. They hate taxes in New Hampshire. And that sunk Reagan in New Hampshire. A single policy idea hurts a candidate. That would seem quite foreign to us today. When think about the things, also, I guess I would say this about Donald Trump. Think about the things people do know about him. They know about what he said about Mexicans at his opening statement. They know what he said about Muslims. Now, the Speaker of the House came out and spoke against him on that account. Dick Cheney came out and said that that was inconsistent with American values. Mitch McConnell said that. I think it's true, every exit poll, or certainly the vast majority, the majority of voters participating in the Republican process overwhelmingly supported the Trump position. So the things that people know in the Republican process about Donald Trump, about what he said about Mexicans, what he said about Muslims, about deportation of 11 million, they know all of that. Is it conceivable then that if they read a fact check about how his numbers don't add up on the budget, that they would say, well, I was with him on what he said about Mexicans and Muslims, but the fact that his numbers don't add up, I'm not going to follow him. It just wasn't the way they were looking at the electorate. So I think it goes back to the original part of our conversation, which was voters that I talked to who were at his rallies see him speaking to a larger truth on their behalf after politician after politician has come to them and sold them a bill of goods about how they were going to fight for their interests and then went to Washington and didn't fight for them. They think he will fight on their behalf when he comes to Washington, which is extraordinary when you think about how much he's changed his positions on different things. That people might think, oh, well, maybe he'll change his positions when he comes to Washington. That doesn't seem to be an impediment.
I asked this question I'll ask the same question I asked Megyn Kelly. And it was, do you think that our present, this campaign can owe something of its tenor to the idea that for years, the idea that government can achieve nothing has been matched with an idea that the press is entirely editorially skewed in one way or the other. And so there's no fair check on an object that itself is close to worthless. And so Trump can attack the government as being completely bad, and he will trash the whole thing. And the press, in his own words, are scum.
Right. Well, that goes to your previous point. That's why the fact-checking doesn't do any work.
There's no referee anymore.
Right. Well, the referees are there. It's just nobody's listening to them.
Well, you've roughed up the refs so much that everyone just wants to see.
Yeah, and the refs have, done a little of the work on their own behalf. I mean, we were not angels in this world, and often because it's tough. Like the picture is moving. Things are hard to get a hold of. So the question is whether you should look at reporting like science. One of the things when you go back and look at these campaigns, I mean, boy, the press is constantly getting things wrong. Dewey defeats Truman is just one little thing. I mean, George McGovern never going to go anywhere. That guy's, he's too liberal, right? He becomes the nominee of the party. Andrew Jackson, he doesn't care about the presidency. It's just one story after another. Goldwater, never going to win. Of course Scranton's going to get, they're just, anyway. But that's what happens because history is what surprises us. So at these signature moments, a lot of people are going to be surprised. And a lot of those people are the ones who've been watching it happen.
Well, as someone who's been watching it happen, does this election surprise you? Where sort of Hillary Clinton is in relation to Bernie Sanders and the sort of his continued resistance and how far he's going to take it, or that Donald Trump is where he is? I mean,
the Donald Trump piece surprises me for this reason. Anybody who's covered movement conservative politics and the Tea Party, and those are slightly different things, over the last few election cycles, knows about the anger in the country and the sense of frustration with the lawmakers in Washington. I mean, that's certainly what hurt John Boehner. It's why Eric Cantor no longer is in the Congress. That was very familiar to us. And this feeling that we've sent you to Washington again and again, and all you do is tell us how you can't get things done. That sense of frustration was alive. What was surprising to me was that when I talked to voters who expressed that frustration repeatedly, they would say, I want somebody who's going to say something and stick to it no matter what. Donald Trump has said a lot of things that he has evolved on significantly, so that they would pick somebody who has evolved so much when in other contexts they've said evolution, nuance is all a dirty word.
But every time he says whatever new thing he says, he sounds like he is standing on firm ground every time.
Right. And they
So it has a Moses from the mountaintop declaratory, quality to it, and so you forget that he said anything before. The other day he said that there shouldn't be guns in classrooms, though I think teachers should be allowed to have them.
Yeah.
In the same breath, not even the same sentence. He didn't have to go, he just got it all out. And the guy does not have good wind. He got it all out in one. So how do you fact check that? How do you fact check that sentence?
Right. Well,
without like a Mobius strip?
Yeah.
The Mobius candidate.
Yeah. So you remember the press conference when Ben Carson announced that he was coming out for Donald Trump after Carson was out of the race. Carson said, there are two Donald Trumps. And Donald Trump said, yeah, there are two Donald Trumps. And then later in the press conference, he said, no, there aren't two Donald Trumps. So there are two Donald Trumps on the question of whether there are two Donald Trumps.
Three, it might be three. It might be three Donald Trumps there.
But again, if I as a voter think he's speaking to the larger truth, and I think when he's in the Oval Office, he's basically going to be fighting for me roughly, then you let stuff slide. Then you let stuff slide. I mean, that was true. That's been true in one way or another with politicians all along. But he was, again, surprising. Think about how badly he beat the competition. This was the strongest field if you looked at just experience and political success. Scott Walker had done amazing things in Wisconsin in terms of the conservative message and surviving a recall election.
There was a lot of talk that it was a very deep bench this year for the Republicans.
And Donald Trump beat all of them badly. I mean, he didn't just squeak by.
No, the word spanking comes to mind.
New York values. So that's a pretty amazing thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but it is.
I don't know. We all got
I guess here, just in terms of the sense of surprise, that he would have been able to best them all.
There was never a point at which I don't think he was the leading candidate, starting from
when he was not
in the poll of polls. Like, so in the average of polls, starting from like July or something, he was leading the entire time. And every time someone would say, well, he's not going to last, I would just look back and say, well, who was in that position every other time before? That part is very predictable, because whoever's in that position is always the candidate. The person who is the odds-on favorite in terms of the polls consistently all fall is always the guy who gets it. Or woman, but of course.
But in Republican politics, remember, we'd seen that Queen for a Day thing in the last cycle, where 1 minute it's Bachmann, 1 minute it's Kaine, 1 minute it's Santorum, and so there was a lot of analysis, perhaps even by me, that he would come cycle through, and then somebody would cycle in. I mean, for me, if you're writing the lead of the whistle stop, whenever it may be written about this race, is that Donald Trump and Jeb Bush announced their candidacies on adjacent days. Everybody was down covering Bush in Miami-Dade University. It was an audience that represented the new electorate, the electorate that the Republican Party had written about in their autopsy after the 2012 campaign. He spoke Spanish. He was a candidate of this future coalition. Nobody was covering Donald Trump. And then very shortly thereafter, Trump was at the top of the polls and hasn't been, in the Republican side, hasn't slipped from that spot.
I'll give you an example of how poorly I read the situation. Jeb Bush announces, and we think, oh, we'd like to have a Republican on the very first show. Let's have Jeb Bush on. He's clearly going to be the nominee. We'll have a nice relationship with the person who's going to be there for the next year. Donald Trump announces, and we're not on the air for months. And we raced, I got a camera, and we started doing jokes and putting them on the web because we wanted to get our Donald Trump jokes in before he evaporated in a hail of blood.
Yeah.
When when he finally hit the campaign trail, I couldn't have been more wrong about what was going to happen.
Quickly about 1964, there was a.
I've been waiting.
I know.
I've been waiting for Goldwater.
I'm just trying to create a norm that people who are in conversation and being asked questions should constantly come back to the question they were asked that they didn't answer, because we want to encourage that kind of behavior in lawmakers,
Sure. I got a question about that too. That's my next question.
So in 1964, there's a Stop Goldwater movement that has all the success of the Never Trump movement. And
remind us again why Goldwater needed to be stopped in the minds of the Republicans.
well, for two reasons. One, there were liberal and moderate Republicans back then, and they thought Goldwater.
What?
Yeah. Two big things.
Were they wiped out in a tsunami? What happened?
So, and all the governors were more moderate because they were the ones who had to, they said, deal with governing. They couldn't just be a senator who had opinions about things. They had to deal with the riots and the challenges of the city. So, two big things for Goldwater. One, the moderates thought he was a little loose in the way he talked about nukes and just using them, you know, as one might need to if trouble were to arise. And also that maybe NATO could do it too. Just kind of like let 1,000 nukes bloom. That was unsettling. The other thing was that he voted against the Civil Rights Act. And that was a vote in which the Senate Republican majority leader worked with Lyndon Johnson to get that passed. And there were only a small handful of Republicans who voted against it. And Goldwater was one of them. And when he didn't support the Civil Rights Act, Governor Scranton of Pennsylvania, who is a very reluctant candidate, decides to jump in the race. The leader of, or not the leader, one of the leaders of the Stop Trump movement, sorry, strike that, one of the leaders of the Stop Goldwater movement is George Romney, the governor of Michigan. His son is now trying, or has been trying, to stop Trump and having about the same, having the same effect. But you had people saying all the same things now. You know, Hugh Scott, who's a congressman from Pennsylvania, who got Eisenhower to run, was basically saying 70 members of Congress on the Republican side are going to lose if Goldwater gets the nomination. I mean, they were saying the same kinds of things that are being said now.
Well, he did lose quite badly.
He lost very badly. So he got 38% of the vote. Trump is already getting 42, 43. What's changed in our politics is that basically we've become so polarized that whether you have an R or a D in front of your name, that's who I'm voting for. So the number of voters who might slosh around shrunk. So
the National Review has not given up on the Stop Trump. Matter of fact, today there was an article in the National Review begging Romney to jump in at this moment. Is that even possible for a third-party candidate to jump in at this moment? Haven't the Texas sort of ballot deadlines passed by? It really is, you know, as much as it's understandable why Bernie Sanders will want to stay in. If Hillary Clinton has it ostensibly sewn up and it's Trump, it's really just going to be those two people, isn't it?
When Goldwater wins, Nixon tells Pat Buchanan, he says, whenever there's a Stop X movement, be with X. Because it means that he's got the people with him, he's got the mojo, he's going to survive these efforts. And that seems to be the case with Trump. You've seen an amazing number of Republicans move behind him, both in the official ranks, but then we've seen in the polling, regular old Republicans are moving in behind him. He's tied with Hillary Clinton in the suburbs right now. Like, that should be, part of that may be because, not maybe, part of that is because Democrats haven't come behind her, given that their race is still going on. But still, to be tied, given what people were saying in the Republican Party about Donald Trump, what people in the Republican Party were saying about Donald Trump.
Still saying about Donald Trump.
So, anyway, so...
but that gets me back to who gets to be a member of a party. Because you do have Republican elites saying, and I assume that if things get fractious between Hillary or Mrs. Clinton and Bernie Sanders, if it continues, that there are going to be people who are going to say terrible things and take sides in unforgivable ways in that conflict. But on the Republican side, you have people who have put Trump as the leader of the party. And then you have the leaders of the party who say, he can't be that person. So who gets to be the party? Who is the party? The people who voted or the people who are running the party? Because it's a club. It's just a club, really.
It is, and it's really interesting. Donald Trump said, it's called the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party. So he's already saying, now this is really, what Goldwater initiated was the conservative takeover of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is, when he says that it's a Republican Party, not a Conservative Party, that's a pretty profound thing to say.
It is whatever I say it is.
Yeah, and you know why? Because I got all these millions of people who voted for me in a process that was, where everybody was trying to stop me, who runs the, sort of the inside part of the party. They don't run it like they used to.
The party will be whatever I eventually reveal myself to be. Because there is a little bit of elect me and find out. Yeah. Which is fun.
And that's part of it.
Right. Add suspense.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Find out what my taxes are. Find out what my, my foreign policy is. Right. We'll get to that once I'm dealing with foreigners. Right now, I'm just trying to keep them all out of the country. All right, I want to ask you about you for a second, okay? You grew up in Washington. Your mother, Nancy Dickerson, was the first female star of television news. You wrote a book about her. Yeah, Nancy Dickerson. Nancy Dickerson. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move off of Nancy Dickerson because the last time we talked, I called John's mother a dish on national TV, and he visibly blushed. In your book about your mom and your relationship with her, On Her Trail, which is a wonderful book if you guys haven't read it, you say, quote, covering Washington politics warps people. Covering it for a network can warp you even further, ever further. Okay, you're coming up on your first anniversary as host of Face the Nation. Have you warped? And, you know, if not, what kept you on the level?
Yeah, so two things. I hope I haven't warped, because one of the great things about the people I work with at Face the Nation in particular, they are solid people. So when Mom was, just think about this, she was the first and at the time sort of only star on television. There were 3 channels. She was on one of them. When she walked the streets, and you probably have some familiarity with this, I mean, people did the most extraordinary things, you know, and they would not only, it was the fawning, but, you know, the planes got held for you. And like the best bottle of wine showed up at your table because the owner of the restaurant wanted to be, you know, near you or say they'd given you the best bottle of wine. And the fact that she was attractive in a world where men could, one of the books that I was doing the bibliography for last night for Whistle Stop was written by this Hugh Scott. His little note that he wrote to her in the front, you know, said, Nancy Dickerson, peripatetic and pretty too. Everything, you could do fanny pats back then. And so the adulation and the lifting up by everybody who walked around was incredibly warping. That's not...
That's the warping you're talking about.
That's the warping
I'm
talking about, the fame that comes with it. And
well, you are the host of the #1 Sunday show right now.
But the thing is,
that comes with no warping at all?
Well, Did
you measure yourself before you took the job?
Yes.
Did you take a plumb line in some way of your own spine, John?
Well, so it depends where you, if you believe that everything is warping and that we're warped and that we need to be forgiven because we're warped, then the job you have is only maybe an amplification of that. But you're working on that project to deal with, you know, your pride and ego and all of that before you get the job. So then you're suddenly challenged in a different way. But again, the reason the show is #1 is not because of me, it's because of all the people I work with. And so because that is if that were a situation in which, well, you know, I just walk on and I do the magic, then that would be warping. But if you actually watch the way it happens, I'm just, you know, a participant in a process. And so that makes it, feels much more grounding, I think, than when what Mom was doing was much more of a, you know, it was a...
Star vehicle.
Yeah, she was I mean, the people that she hung out with were, you know...
Well, she had a close relationship with Kennedy. She had a close relationship, thank you.
Careful.
I will, yes. Close relationship with Johnson, and she was fairly close to Nixon as well.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. He used to call her up when he was drunk at night.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know?
So is that access? First of all, do you have access to anybody like that? Do you have that kind of relationship that we'll eventually read about in some child's book about you?
Yes, exactly. My kids are already taking notes.
Or is that a lost thing? Does that not exist anymore in a cozier Washington where those kind of relationships were all right?
No.
Or does that not exist anymore?
They exist, although the power of the individual people to, I mean, other than the president, the power of the individuals to assert the kind of control over the system that a majority leader could when Lyndon Johnson was majority leader is different. I mean, Mitch McConnell has to be very much more careful about things than Lyndon Johnson could be. So you can have the relationships, but and it's with a powerful person, but it's not with a snap finger powerful person, which is what some of her relationships were like. There was a lot more done that nobody saw back then. And by this, I'm talking still about politics. And so that coziness was, it was just much, it was much cozier than it is now, even if you have close relationships with people. I mean, I've reported
Is that coziness a bad thing? Because, let me compare to something else, earmarks.
Yeah.
Earmarks are something that are sort of missed in Washington, D.C. because it was a lubricant to get
Stuff done.
Stuff done, exactly.
Yeah.
Is that coziness something that was in any way beneficial?
Oh, well, you know, it was good and bad. So the coziness got things done. The closeness in relationships helped grease deals that, in the end of the day, created legislation that ended up actually helping human people, right? So when there's no legislation passed and just the basic fundamental budgeting process of government can't happen because of the sclerosis, then you're not doing the basic forms of government. So people can argue that, that earmarks would help those basic functions of government take place. But when you think of a system where people who gain access to politicians in the way they do now by contributing to their campaigns, you know, so that's another kind of access now that's different, and that and those kinds, that's a whole new level of people, because so much more money is a part of campaigns than it used to be. You have so many more people who now have access because, not because they're reporters, but because they write big checks.
Okay, we have a couple questions from the audience here. Let's see. The first one here is, can Bill Clinton's past take down Hillary Clinton's future? I will also say, can you throw Hillary Clinton's past in there? Can the things from the 90s count now?
Well, so it feels like this campaign is going to be a lot about Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's past and Donald Trump's past. I mean, elections are supposed to be about the future, and it feels like we're not having that conversation, although we'll try to actually, I mean, you know, one of our jobs is to try to take the conversation and make it about the future and people's lives, not about adjudicating the past, except where the past goes to character and temperament, which is crucial because we're not going to be there when the big decisions are made, and you need people who have the character and temperament for the job. So, I don't know. We are in...
It's definitely going to be used, all of that 1990 stuff. It was revealed today that Trump has a plan to bring Whitewater back up.
Right.
And the reason we know this is that a member of the Trump campaign accidentally CC'd someone from Politico on an email describing the plan, which it just proves that Hillary Clinton is the second worst at using email of anyone.
Although you could argue she's very good at using email.
That's true. Yeah. She pretends like she doesn't know how it works.
Yeah.
Do you wipe it with a cloth?
I
don't know.
Yeah.
How does electricity work? It just.
Do you remember the old Saturday Night Live skit about Ronald Reagan, where when the cameras were on, he was kind of confused, and then when they were turned off, he was a genius? That's the way it was with the email.
Yes.
I don't know how to log into AOL, and then the cameers are off, and boom, downstairs with the servers.
She's hacking into the system.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. To both, I'm flattered. What does your morning media diet look like? International v. domestic, conservative v. centrist v. liberal. There is only liberal media. There is only. Okay, that's one. What is your morning media diet? How do you start the engine?
I start the day with your show while I'm shaving.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Because you watch it on the
telephone.
On the
yeah,
telephone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to shave.
And what are you wearing? What are you wearing when you do this? How much are we shaving?
Yeah.
This is what I'm asking at this point. Well, I've already confessed that every Friday, even though my show is not as politically focused as it used to be, I still every Friday or Thursday night now, I'm obsessed with the political gab fest. Yeah.
Normally it's white tie for the shaving.
But just here and here, like a Chippendales dancer.
We're gonna
totally pull it off.
We're gonna have to let them
pull it off.
Then we're gonna have to let them. We got to find somebody to clear the buffer of that image.
So what do you go to websites? Where do you go?
So
it's like the Times, Journal, the Post?
It starts with the big paper. I use a lot. The
physical paper.
Yeah. Oh God, I love the physical paper. Sure. And I still have the little. I just introduced to my daughter the the special cutting tool that allows you to cut actual newspaper, you know, that we used to use in the old days to cut out an actual article without like scissors, because they only let me have the ones with the rounded edges. And this one, this is the tool, nice clean cut. You get your, yeah. So I love the physical paper because you get the layout of what's important right in front of you. You can skim, you know these 3 paragraphs are just setting up the idea you already know, so now you go to the 4th one. But the problem is that I spend so much of my time going over notes of things that I basically take notes from the paper, like in these notebooks, and then I have to translate them into digital. It just takes too much time. So I end up using basically a series of aggregators, and then I use Instapaper and Evernote to basically clip and grab pieces of stories. And
you're opining about Evernote is what got me on Evernote.
Yeah. How do you feel about it?
I like it. Yeah, just grab it and throw it in there, and you got it for later.
And you know about Command A?
No.
So any website you're on, are you Mac or PC?
It's a very personal question.
Yeah, no, sorry. Whichever you happen to be, you highlight a web page, the text you want, and then you hit Command A, and it shoots it right into Evernote.
Oh, I'm in.
You don't even have to open anything else up.
For me, at night, I get a news digest from my staff. That's the first thing. I go to bed, I've got a nighttime news digest. It's usually a dozen stories, top stories, and then odd things on the edges. I often learn news from the scripts that my writers have written that day that I get at the end of the night before I go to bed. I read the front page of the news page of Reddit, and then I read the random pages of Reddit. Like I don't have the pages that are upvoted. I just have whatever the newest things are, as opposed to the upvoted pages of news in Reddit. I look at the politics page. I look at Drudge. I've started looking at something called the Liberty Daily. Have you seen this? It's the Drudge report that believes that Drudge is sold out. It's the anti-Trump Drudge report, which is really fascinating. I look at HuffPo, the New York Times. I look at CNN. But then I say that a lot of it comes from what is being mostly upvoted on the new front page of the news page of Reddit. Because I can discover things in ways that they're being curated in ways that the normal news media doesn't.
Right. What about long reads or deep reads? Like, or are you constantly grazing?
I do not have time for that bullshit. No, it all has to be digested for me because
like a bird chewing up its food.
It kind of does because I've got so many. I don't have the top news story of the day. I have what we can make funny. That's my headline.
Here's a question.
And so I have to consume so much in the hopes that we can find synthesis and intersection between stories, and the juxtaposition of those stories is often where the comedy happens, so I can't go that deep anymore. Like, I also don't have Fridays to catch up. We did 20 months on super PACs on the old show. That was deep reads constantly. Yeah. There's actually so much more churn now on a show that happens every night for an hour that I don't have time for the deep read.
Is that purely a time thing, or have you found yourself incapable of doing? No, because
I'm incapable of. Reading is harder because digital media and video makes reading not the natural muscle you're using all the time.
Yeah, I just wonder whether, here's where I'm going with this, is I don't think I could have read, as a kid now, read The Lord of the Rings. Because I would have been, through the songs, who would have the patience for that? You would get distracted by something else.
Oh, slender as a willow wand, oh, clearer than clear water. Okay.
That was an alley-oop.
Yeah, thank you very much. Top home, thank you very much. Okay, we've already answered, what is Bernie up to? Okay. Well, is there anything you haven't said about what Bernie is up to? What is he going to do? He's going to stay until the convention. He's in it to win it. Yeah. He says he's going to help raise money to primary against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It's getting quite serious.
Yeah, it is, although we'll see how serious it is after California and New Jersey. And just if the numbers, once the process is all over, I think he's got a serious set of policy issues that he could advocate for. And you could imagine as ugly as things have gotten, and again, whatever they work out between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, there is still this constituency out there that has been out there in 2004 with Dean, that was there with McGovern in '62, that was there in '92 with Jerry Brown. the constituency is still there, which thinks that the system is a mess and that it needs to be torn apart and rebuilt.
Do those people vote when their candidate doesn't make it? Or do they just stay home?
Well, what we've seen in the polls so far is the people who say they won't vote for Hillary Clinton, who are supporting Bernie Sanders, are smaller in number than the people who voted, the people in 2008 who said they wouldn't vote for Barack Obama, who were supporting Hillary Clinton. So the contentiousness in the party based on the polling is less now than it was in 2008. So that's one thing that argues possibly for unity. The other thing would be that the Donald Trump as a candidate would encourage people to turn out to vote.
Mm-hmm. Or open a vein. Okay. What can... Okay, so Trump has been very good. Oh, he's did so good. He didn't show any emotion for that entire moment just now. That was very good. Absolutely. The portcullises came crashing down, and you retreated into your newsman. All right. Do you have deeply
a
held...
soul?
No, what I'm asking is, do you have... Okay, there's a moment in Star Trek. There's a moment in Star Trek, the reboot that J.J. Abrams did, which was really just lovely, where old Spock, Leonard Nimoy Spock, is there, and young Chris Pine, Captain Kirk, meet on this ice planet. And Spock has just watched his entire planet be destroyed, all the Vulcans destroyed. And Spock conveys to Kirk, using the Vulcan mind thing, all the emotion. He lets him see inside Spock's mind or heart or whatever it is.
The emotion that he's had to keep bottled up for his entire life.
Well, the emotion of that moment, like that. And Kirk is absolutely torn asunder by the experience. And he goes, so you do feel. and he goes, of course I do. I've watched my entire civilization be destroyed. Okay, so do you have deeply held, passionate political beliefs about this particular election that if I were to Vulcan mind meld with you would make me burst into tears and shiver and go, oh, you do feel, but you cannot share with us right now?
Well,
and if you do, just sit there and blink.
So what I feel passionately about is all that stuff I was talking about at the beginning, that elections should be a chance to have a conversation. If elections really are still a place where people feel like they have some control, where you can go to somebody when the damn water thing isn't providing you with water, if that's your best avenue, and that avenue is shut off either because we're not doing our jobs or because politicians are fooling people, that's what animates me. That's because when you think about all the people you meet when you go out and talk to them, who are at the rallies for whichever party it is, who are talking about the fact that they don't have enough money to fix their daughter's broken arm, and who are at a rally to find a solution to that problem, which for them keeps them up at night, is causing their daughter pain. When that gets interrupted by a process that stinks, that's what animates me. All
right. Yeah. Live long and prosper.
And that, yeah. Well, no, the question is whether...
I believe you.
No,
I believe you, and you clearly are passionate about it.
So, but then the question is, what do you, whether the model is that you want to snap your fingers and fix that. You can't. I mean,
you want as a human being?
Yeah.
Or do you wish to use...
Face
the Nation to make the world a better place?
Face the Nation, CBS, this conversation, everything to try to... But the increments, you can want to do that. It's like the other things you might want to do in life that you're constantly rolling the rock up the hill and, but you got to keep pushing the rock. It's not, but I guess the point is you can't think of it as you have to think of it as quite a slow progression. I mean, things aren't going to change in that, in the way we have our politics took a long time to get this broken. It's going to take a long time to get unbroken.
The metaphor of the rock up the hill, of course, is Sisyphus. And where is he rolling the rock up the hill? Do you know?
Yeah, at the DMV.
Exactly so. Exactly so. Okay, so Hillary's got a new moniker, lucky woman that she is. It's Crooked Hillary. all of these have stuck until this person has disappeared. What can she do, says this person, to lose the crooked label?
So in politics, usually the thing that hurts you the most is when a label gets placed on you and then you, in real time, affirm that label. So if my answer to you has, in their minds, been, if you've come out and you've said, he's a slippery guy, and then my answers to you have affirmed that, even if they are about what did you have for breakfast, then you can't wriggle out of that. You can't get out of that. And so the only way you get out of it is by not inhabiting the caricature. And by the way, when Mitt Romney had his 47% moment, it fell on freshly tilled, prepared ground by the Obama campaign to set him up as the guy who is responsible for you not having your job because he's your careless boss. That was the way it was explained to me. So when that ground has been prepared and then the video falls into that, it resonates in a way that it might not if it was just, that was a pretty powerful video. But
are you suggesting that Hillary Clinton has done some things that play into the crooked Hillary?
I think that if you listen, let's leave her aside for the moment. Let's,
No. Let's not.
You can come back if this is unsatisfying.
I have a follow-up question, and it is, what did you have for breakfast?
I might have had cereal. I might have had a bagel.
You lost the gluten-free vote right there.
But they both could have been gluten-free.
Okay.
Yeah. Phew, I've won it back.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 1992 campaign, when Bill Clinton went on 60 Minutes and had that famous interview with Steve Kroft about having caused pain in his marriage, he said in that interview, he talked in a certain way about how he had no relationship with Jennifer Flowers, and he denied any relationship with her. Then audio tapes came out in which he was heard, or somebody with a voice very similar to his, was heard giving that advice to her, essentially a version of what he had just said on 60 Minutes.
Deny.
What the previous night had seemed like a plausible, at least judging the polling afterwards, there was a poll that 80% of the country said, we don't care about this stuff, in the night right after 60 Minutes. Then when that audio tape came out in which he's coaching Jennifer Flowers, deny, it was in the same voice as the one that had seemed so compelling before. Suddenly, that pitch, which had seemed compelling, now seems like, oh my God, he can
apply that to anything.
And suddenly, it completely flips what has been said. And so I guess my point is then when he was asked about the draft, which came as the next challenge for him in 1992 in New Hampshire, and he said, well, I went into ROTC and then I re-upped for the draft when 4 of my friends were killed. People thought, that's not plausible. You're telling us something with a straight face that's totally implausible. And so it's not even the facts of the case so much as you're giving us a fresh example of how you're not telling us the truth. And that's what hurt him with voters, although not enough, because he came in second and then went on to win the nomination in 1992, as you may remember.
So Hillary Clinton, the crooked thing, why do you think, is there a chance that would stick? Just to follow up, it's not my question.
Here's the question.
It's this
So
good viewer's question.
No, well, here's what that good viewer has done. They have allowed an opposition candidate to name the other candidate. Would we so quickly have in another race allowed one candidate to put a label on the other that would stick? I mean, sticking is the voter's choice. They can allow a thing to stick or not. And so this gets to the complicated question of consumption of what a candidate says and what role voters play in that and what role the news media plays in that and how that role has changed. The gatekeeper role isn't what it was in the 60s, right? We can arrange our gates as we please in the traditional media, but social media is out there allowing a river of communication that is unfiltered. Reddit is the perfect example. So a label sticks, first of all, if voters let it stick, if they feel like it's an adequate description of a candidate, and then the candidate has to either play into it or not. The answers on the email server, when Hillary Clinton says she's been transparent, That's just not, when you set up your own email server to go around the internal systems of the State Department for keeping records, that's not transparency. So when you say it's transparency, people are going to say that doesn't square with my sense of transparency. Voters notice that.
The State Department released their report saying that, was it today or yesterday?
Today.
Today, saying, yeah, she didn't ask permission, and if she had, we would have said no.
Right.
And they also said that they didn't state whether it's legal or illegal, and then they said that 5 other Secretary of States have done it. That is a meal nutritious to both sides. If you think she's corrupt, that validated it. If you think this is a big nothing, that also validates it.
Right.
Problem, samed.
No, maybe. I mean, the argument that everybody did it is true only to a point, because it's one thing to have a personal email. So let's say, it's one thing to run a red light. It's another thing to run the red lights from here to Chicago. I mean, she set up an entire separate server for herself outside the system. That's more than what previous secretaries had done. So it's similar but different.
Okay. I know we've been going for a while here. You okay to answer a few more?
Yeah.
You guys have a moment more? Here? All right. What could be the consequences of the rhetoric of this campaign to other countries? In other words, how is this campaign being perceived by our allies?
Well, in that case, that question is really talking about Donald Trump. So here's what my report, here's what my reporting tells me. So you talk to former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. He thinks it has a huge impact because the Muslim countries that the United States is trying to ally with, they're Muslim countries. And so when a candidate says there's going to be a ban for Muslims coming into the United States, that makes that job difficult.
And then that candidate gets the nomination.
Right. And that candidate can excite a crowd full of people behind that notion. David Petraeus, who knows a great deal about how to work with Muslim communities. I mean, if you look at the counterinsurgency strategy, it required an understanding of those neighborhoods and why, when you walk through those neighborhoods, it's better to not wear your sunglasses and not wear the big, armor plating around you and not roll in with the tanks. So he understands at a person-to-person level about the relationships that are necessary to fight wars in this process. And he wrote in the Washington Post that this was incredibly dangerous. So these are people, these aren't opinions, these are the people who have been entrusted by both Republicans and Democrats with the safety of the country, and they have rendered that opinion. You've also got other chairmen of committees in Washington who've said the same thing. So you don't have to listen to, say, John Kerry, because of course he's going to say this hurts America, or the president's going to say it because they don't like Donald Trump. Those other voices are ones that have been validated by both parties.
We've only got a few more minutes here. Let's see, that's a good one. These are good questions. What's the one thing you know?
That's a great question. Oh my God.
Maybe you know more than one thing.
Well, no, because
it becomes intensely personal right away.
Right, exactly. Suddenly,
Yeah.
suddenly my wife and kids are in front of my eyes. That's what I know. Them. That's not a word, but it's people that, whatever. That's a whole collection of things, right? But being the person that they think you are, wanting to be the person that they think you are, right? There's in there a line about that: be the person you want your dog to, that your dog thinks you are.
I like that. No,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. No, yeah. Be the person your dog thinks you are not the person God knows you are.
Right. Right. Well, the bigger one is that, we were about to be in Sunday school, and I didn't want to do that, so, yeah. No, just that pride is really, that's a killer. It's always, no matter who you are.
Well, I've enjoyed this immensely, as I usually do when I talk with you, but usually we're having old fashions when it happens. I'll end with one last question, which is, campaigns often seem to me to be about two things. One is what the campaign's really about, and then questions that get asked about something that is not particularly important. For instance, in 2004, the campaign was really about terrorism, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It ended up being, at times, about anti-gay marriage amendments. That was obfuscation in some ways. In 2008, there was the economy and our continuing wars, and then it was about things on the campaign trail like flag pins. What is it this year? What is the real story about, and what is the shiny object that is not truly about, but we keep returning to it over and over again?
So, and that gets us back to that first thing, which is what is this election about? I think essentially this election is about the fact that people feel, both culturally and economically, like the systems that, the system is against them. It's either actively against them, or it's getting in the way, and it cannot be fixed. And so what that system does in their daily lives is it creates an economy in which their wages have been essentially flat. It creates a healthcare system in which prices are rising and coverage is shrinking. It creates a system in which college is unaffordable. College, which is the ticket to a life that's better than the one you led, is you can't afford it, or you can get the college degree and then the job has been automated, and so it's not there for you anyway. So people feel, and people don't think about the other problems that exist, but our tax code is a mess, our entitlements need to be dealt with. None of these things is being fixed by the political system as it exists right now. And so the question is whether, and that's because of a lot of structural things we haven't talked about: split ticket voting, people living around in areas with people who are like them, and therefore it creates, there's nothing in the system that pulls people to compromise. It pushes people to tribalism.
And so then, okay, I accept that all.
So the question is whether that can be broken apart, whether the old idea of campaigns, which is ideas so what is the question? The question is whether the system can work at all, or whether it's all shiny objects.
What is the shiny object?
Well, in part, the shiny object is, we don't know, because it's the newness of the shiny object that takes our attention. So at the moment,
it's not transgender bathrooms. That seems like a shiny
well,
object
you know what?
to me.
It is. It's a little shiny, which is to say that there are interest groups on both sides who have passion for the issue that goes beyond the serious, as we talked about. There are serious issues at the center of that question. Why do they become a part of the national conversation, and therefore, once you elevate these into the national conversation, then solution and compromise is, because too many people benefit from the clash. So there are real issues at the heart of that, and then it gets elevated. So that doesn't feel shiny object-y to me. What feels shiny object-y to me is a candidate doesn't leave a tip at a restaurant, and that becomes a huge deal. Or they're overheard saying something that isn't right, or they forward an email, and the email, the candidates don't send emails anymore, but it's a little thing that becomes a big thing and has nothing at its root, really. It has no larger argument, no larger fight over rights, no sense of these large, I think transgender bathrooms attaches to, as you pointed out, for a lot of people, it represents an encroachment on values that they see slipping away in lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. And in other people, it represents...
Wasn't the gay marriage amendment the same argument?
Yeah, I think it was, except that with that, you had a group, what's amazing about the movement in America on gay marriage is that it should give people hope in terms of how fast that happened and how slow the rest of politics moves. Mm-hmm. So if you are hopeful for a result, whether it is in the liberal way or in the conservative way, there is a route to fast action that has been, in one case, successful in that issue. But because otherwise it's despair, because think about the system and the way it's kind of locked in, and here we have a race that looks like it's going to be pretty ugly.
I don't want to stop on despair.
Yeah.
What should we be most hopeful about in this election? What's the thing that makes us happiest about politics right now when we see in our political landscape?
Well,
or did
that
you just
we've
say
been
it
in
about things like change is possible?
Change is possible in that way, and also we've been in these fixes as a country before, and we've broken out of them. It's often puts a lot of dents on the car, but every 4 years people sign up to a process that often has disappointed them. And the reason they sign up for that process is they see something in the person running, or they see something in the person sitting next to them that shows that more connects them than divides them. And so participating in that process reaffirms the idea that basically we're all struggling with the same damn thing, which is how to get through the day, be with our families, make something for yourself, and at the end of the day, or when you're shaving in the morning, watch you bring us joy with your show.